Hi, it's May 8th, 2017. I'm Nancy Harrington. I'm here with Pam Fryman for the interviews, an oral history project of the Television Academy Foundation in North Hollywood, California. Okay, so we'd like to just start with a few minutes of background information.
Okay.
What was your name at birth?
Pamela Gail Fryman.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital on August 19th, 1959.
And did you grow up there as well?
I did. I grew up there, and I lived in a suburb, Villanova, Pennsylvania. That's where my childhood was.
What were your parents' names and what did they do for a living?
Norman Fryman, a fashion executive. Sandra Fryman, a homemaker.
And do you have any siblings?
I do. I have two older siblings, my sister Shelley and my brother Jim, who's the oldest.
What kind of traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
A sense of humor, great organizational skills, all that warmth and love and support, a lot of great things.
What were your interests growing up?
Television. Yeah, anything that had to do with that. Sports as well. I mean, I played a lot of sports in school, and I was involved in theater, and family. Just a lot of great memories.
What were some of your favorite TV shows?
That Girl, Bewitched, Family, Rich Man, Poor Man, Mary Tyler Moore, The Cosby Show, a thousand others.
What, do you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Absolutely not. No doubt. You know, I don't want to say back in the day, but sort of back in the day, you know, for me, Philadelphia was a long way away from Los Angeles. So that never seemed like a possibility to me that I would be involved in this kind of business. But I dreamt about it a lot. I thought I might want to be an actress, but I wasn't, I didn't think talented enough and certainly not brave enough. And I thought I would probably go into the fashion industry like my dad.
So there was one TV show that taped in Philadelphia, and you had an internship on that. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I was a senior in high school, and as the story goes, there was someone who went to my high school who was older than me, whose father was a producer on that show. And there was an internship program, kind of they called it field experience. And for the second half of your senior year in high school, you could go and work for a few hours several times a week. And I asked if that might be a possibility, because I really was a TV kid, and I thought going downtown and going to the Mike Douglas show might be fantastic. And I was told that people had tried to do that, but they weren't accepting interns, and that was that. But I ended up, I should say I never stopped asking. And I went down there for an interview, and they were lovely, and they agreed. And so for the second half of my senior year in high school, I went down there a few times a week. I took the bus downtown, and it was everything. And I made good friends, and they are truly responsible in a big way as to everything else that unfolded in my career.
What were your responsibilities as an intern?
My big responsibility before computers, they had file cabinets with files of every person in the world that you can imagine. And we would add to those, but I remember the first thing they said to me was to go through and pull out all the files of the people who had died. That was me. And I did it happily. I did anything and everything they asked. I just thought being in that building and being able to interact with those people who were so lovely was a dream come true.
Did you meet Mike?
I did meet Mike.
What was he like?
He was lovely. I can't tell you that I spent a lot of time with him, but he was a very nice man to me, certainly.
So did that sort of pique your interest in having a career in television?
It didn't pique it, it defined it. It made it possible, even though I didn't really think it was possible because it was still Philadelphia. But there were so few shows like that, and everybody came to that town to do that show. And I specifically remember I was a huge Robert De Niro fan. I had seen Mean Streets with my brother, and I thought he was just the most remarkable actor. And it was back then that the movie New York, New York came out. And they had co-hosts on that show, and Liza Minnelli came on, and Robert De Niro showed up. And he wasn't going to be on the show, but he was sort of in the audience watching. And I just remember that feeling like, I'm in the same room as this remarkable actor. There are so many other people that came on that show during my time there. But it made the dream a little bit of a reality, but I never thought that reality would continue.
And so where did you go to college and what did you study?
I went to Penn State, where my parents went, where my sister went, where my parents met, but soon realized it was not for me. And I left there and ended up going to a fashion merchandising school in New York City, where my dad worked in the city. He sort of commuted to New York. And there was something, it was sort of like entertainment as well. He worked for high fashion. It was a lot of fashion shows and things. It was just that sort of that same kind of energy. And I loved it, but I never stopped loving what I did when I was in high school. And I kept in touch with those people, not because I was trying to work an angle, but because they became my friends. And when I graduated, the Mike Douglas show ended up moving from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. I think it was because of me. I'm not sure. I think they were just trying to do something wonderful for me. But it gave me an excuse to go out there. My brother was going to law school in California, and we drove cross-country after I graduated. And I ended up staying with a friend of mine who had worked on Douglas in Philadelphia, and then things just started to happen.
So what was your first job in the industry when you got to LA?
I arrived on a Tuesday. It's going to sound ridiculous, but this is absolutely true. I arrived on a Tuesday, and I called this wonderful woman, Patty Bourgeois, who had worked as a talent coordinator on the Mike Douglas show, from a payphone at Laurel Canyon and Ventura Boulevard. And I went over and stayed with her. My brother was off to school. I stayed in her house, in her apartment for a couple of nights, and she said to me, come visit me, because they were working out of NBC in Burbank, and it was the show that I knew so well. So I found a cab in Los Angeles, not bad, and I went to Burbank, and I got to the gate, and my name was at the gate, which was one of the great thrills of my life. But coming from New York, I was shocked when the cab driver said two things to me. He said, "I hope you get the part," which was pretty adorable, and he gave me his card and said, "When you need to be picked up, call me." That's amazing. This is the week I turned 21, by the way. They had changed the Mike Douglas show to the John Davidson show. Mike had gone to do something else. John was hired. I went in to visit her, and in the course of that hour or two that I was there, they asked if I wanted to be their assistant, because they needed an assistant in the talent department. And by the end of the day, I had a job. There's a story you don't hear very often.
Yeah. So what did that job entail?
Answering the phone and saying no. I did that a lot. I also was responsible for getting John Davidson lunch every day, which was a scoop of tuna fish, a scoop of egg salad, and a scoop of cottage cheese, in case anybody's wondering. And then I would sit at the bottom of the stairs. There was an entrance. He went up the stairs, and then he came out and sang a song or something. And he'd get up to the top of the stairs, and he'd look at me and say, "I shouldn't have had the tuna." That's my memory every day. It just became this thing. But everything that I did on that show, from the most menial task in the world, I think they only were menial tasks now that I think about it, it was thrilling. Just getting up in the morning, be able to drive through that gate onto that lot was just remarkable to me.
So obviously that's when you decided to stay here and
Yes, although
stay
my
in
father
television.
promised my mother I'd be home in 2 weeks. Said, give her 2 weeks. Yeah, he was wrong.
So did you have any interest in directing at this point, or?
No, none. Truly none. I wanted to be a PA. And I think, in some strange way, that was a great thing. And I think it just helped pave the way for me, because I was never looking to the next thing. I was totally immersed in what I was doing. And so I gave it my all. I was so happy, so enthusiastic, so willing, not because I was putting any of that on, but because it was just how I felt. And I think when you are so willing to do anything for anybody with a smile on your face, they start giving you more to do. And that's sort of the way it went for me.
So then in '86 you were hired on the new Hollywood Squares.
I was.
So tell us how that came about.
This is just another crazy thing. I was doing, after the talk show ended, I was doing game shows. I was like a booth PA. And I was lucky enough to do, I put out a call and got an offer to do that. But that show was really important in my life for a few reasons. One, it's where I met my husband. Wildly important to this at this very moment. Also, because there were so many wonderful people that came on that stage. One of them was my future mother-in-law, who unfortunately passed away before we got married, but I met her because she came to visit her son. This was even before we were dating. So that holds a very special place in my heart. And then again, it was John Davidson hosting the show. So it was just a ridiculous thing that our paths crossed again and we had become friends. But I will tell you that during that whole game show era for me, I really wanted to get into scripted programming for no other reason than I loved actors. I loved watching actors act. And I was also a fan of soap operas. I'd watch them with my mom, and it was just the thing to do back then. And I was working also on award shows. I was doing the Daytime Emmys as a booth PA. And I sort of told everybody that I came across that if anybody heard of anything in daytime, I would love to be a script PA. And that ended up happening. I got a call for Santa Barbara.
Great. So what were your responsibilities on Santa Barbara?
I was in the booth. I was making sure the actors were saying the right lines. I was taking any notes that the director or the producers were giving. And I was finally sitting there watching actors act, and it was a great show. It was a show with a lot of talent and a lot of heart and a lot of funny. One of my favorite things about that, when they recast, one of the actors was leaving, another actor was coming in, they staged a fight sequence, and somebody was knocked out and they fell behind a couch, and when they got up it was another actor, and that's how that show worked. How perfect is that? And that show truly changed my career.
Because you moved into the position of associate director there.
I did.
And so...
and I did that not because of anything that I did so right, but because one of the associate producers soon after I got there became a director. And I just talk about the right place at the right time. I got to do that. And that job for me, if you asked me to pick one job that I've had in my entire career, what was the most important job, that one would probably win. It taught me everything. And one of the most important things, I'm not quite sure how they do it now, but back then there were two teams. And you were in the booth one day, and then the AD took that show to editing. And spending all of that time in editing, being taught how to put a show together, was so critical And it also taught me how to work quickly. And that's a good calling card.
So in the booth, what does an AD do? Describe that for us.
An AD gets the shots ready, and again, more than anything, puts the show together, is responsible for putting the show together. And that's just sort of ultimately, again, I didn't want to be a director. I wanted to be an AD, and I was an AD for quite some time. I couldn't believe my good fortune. And the people that I worked with at that time, so many of them are still good friends today. Just the environment was so creative and loving and remarkable. And yeah, I mean, you basically took care of the show. You took it to editing, you put it all together to time, and then you would ultimately make any changes along the way.
Now, you mentioned working fast. Talk about
Yes.
a production schedule of a soap versus...
It's ridiculous. It's just, when I think about it now, it was just insane. We were in very early, we would do blind rocking in a rehearsal hall. Then we'd find our way onto the stage, and we were doing, 70, 80 pages a day. And somehow that was okay. That was the norm. We'd do a scene a few times. We'd do a dress rehearsal. We'd go out. We'd give notes. We'd, shoot, and then we'd reshoot, and then we'd shoot, and then somebody would come in and think we were spending too much money, so we'd just start, moving quicker. It was just interesting and educational.
So now, you said you didn't want to become a director, but you did, in fact, direct your first episode of TV for
How about that?
Santa Barbara. So how did that happen?
I just said no enough. It's amazing what happens when you say no. The executive producer came to me and asked me to do an episode, and I said okay, but not because I wanted to direct, but because how rude would that be to say no? And I was wildly nervous, but I had the support of everybody, and I'd known everyone for so long, and I think everybody got a kick out of it and enjoyed the experience for me. And if you want the cover of the script, it's still hanging on my parents' wall. But I did it, and it was done, and I didn't do it expecting there to be another one. I did it because how lucky was I that I got to do that. But it turned out, in fact, that there was another one.
So did you have mentors on the show that sort of helped you?
I absolutely did. I would say my champion for sure was Jill Phelps, who has been a wildly successful executive producer in daytime forever. And we hit it off. We're still great friends today. But she was so smart, and she is so smart. She was so smart and how she ran a show, and she knew what worked and she knew what didn't work, and she knew how to tweak a scene. And when she came on board, she really pushed me. So I was really lucky. I was really lucky there. But the most interesting thing to me, and I know we may get into talking about being a woman in this business, and I will tell you that while I was there, and directing, not a lot, but enough, and it was wonderful. I ended up getting pregnant with my twin daughters, and I went up to the executive producer's office just to say, hey guys, I'm very pregnant. And their response was, we'd like to offer you a contract. And that's sort of how my career has gone. I have been so wildly fortunate. And that's just a prime example. I was truly going in to say, see y'all later, thank you so much, and they wanted me to stick around.
That's great.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the style of shooting a soap opera. Are there certain shots and angles that are specific more to soap operas than episodic TV?
There certainly are. It's a lot tighter than it is anywhere else. And yeah, it's efficient, is what I would say. And there's a lot of foreground, a lot of floral arrangements that find their way onto the set in daytime, and you sort of dolly past them. you just sort of had to get the job done. What was so great about Santa Barbara was we ended up going outside a lot. We had big weddings. We had, you know, just they spent some money and made things look pretty remarkable. So it was fun to be a part of that. But for me, even as a viewer, I liked it when the actors were in sets that I knew. It just made it more comfortable for me, and that's why I'd fallen in love with the show in the first place. So you could get creative, certainly, but you had to get the job done in a specific amount of time. You were always moving too slowly, no matter, even when you were moving really fast. So I would say efficient is the best way to describe it.
Now, you won 2 Daytime Emmys for directing for that show. How did that
Well,
feel?
let's be specific here. I won 2 Daytime Emmys for being on the directing team of a soap opera. I certainly didn't. I think it was I an AD for both of them. They still give you one, whatever it is.
You won.
I walked out with those beauties, and it was so much fun. And I think the show deserved them. I think it was really wonderful.
So were there any techniques or processes that you learned on Santa Barbara that you applied towards your career in directing episodic TV?
Well, I suppose because it taught me how to put a show together, I would say that's a valuable tool that I got from there, and throughout my career, even today, I use those lessons that I learned back then for sure. Speed, we talked about. There's no doubt that I've been asked back to do shows because I'm fast, and I learned it from there. And when I'm marking a script, I do it the way I learned on Santa Barbara. I mean, it's funny, as a director, you don't work with other directors, so you don't really know what anybody else is doing. So, you know, we all have our own system, and if you look at my scripts, the ones that I do mark up, it looks a lot like the ones that I marked up back then.
So why did you leave the show?
Because they canceled it, and because I had many children. But when the show was canceled, they did the end credits. They took a shot of everybody. It was their name and a picture of them. I was at home with 2 kids, so they came to my house. So if you look at the end credits of the last Santa Barbara, I'm there holding my daughters. That's why. But then I stayed in daytime and did some other shows for a while.
And then you moved on to episodic TV and pilots and series.
Yes.
So how did you go about getting work at that stage in your career?
Well, again, not because I was longing to do nighttime at all. It scared me it never even occurred to me that that was a possibility. But over the years in game shows, I had worked with an executive producer named Peter Noah. And he would say to me, you'd be great, you'd be a great director, a great comedy director. And I'm like, that made absolutely no sense to me. But if you fast forward, he was doing a show called Cafe American over at Warner Brothers. And I was doing General Hospital at the time, I think. And he called me and told me to come over and to observe Jimmy Burrows. And I said, thank you, but that's ridiculous. How could I possibly do that? And he said, because you're on the schedule, you're doing episode 15. And again, that's just somebody putting themselves out there for me. So I went over and watched Jimmy, and I sat in the audience, and that guy really knows what he's doing. And I said, Jimmy, give me some advice. And he said, you've been shooting in here. Widen out. This is funny. That's what he told me. So I was like, okay. And I ended up doing an episode of Cafe American. And it was a very wild week. It was the week of the Northridge earthquake. It was we rehearsed Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, shot Monday, Tuesday. That Sunday night, early Monday morning, was the Northridge earthquake. And I remember running in, I was living in Sherman Oaks, we really got rocked. And I was running in to my girls, and as I'm holding them, thinking the whole world is going to end, I thought, oh my God, I have to camera block. And I was so nervous about camera blocking. It seemed like a really big sign. I'm not quite sure what. But it turned out that the show was pushed a couple of weeks because the stage had suffered some damage. And I had suffered some damage in here, certainly. And it gave me a couple of weeks to put some things in perspective. And it turns out that if it's a two-shot and somebody wants a single, you can get a single. So it worked out. I should also mention that when we finally shot that show, we did our dress rehearsal, and before we did the show for the audience, the show was canceled. So why I continued in primetime, I have no idea, because it was not a great time for me initially.
Well, you persevered.
I certainly did.
Talk a little bit more about James Burrows. Did he give you any other advice besides the widening your shots?
He told me to wear comfortable shoes. And I think his greatest advice wasn't actual advice. It was just the good fortune to be able to sit and watch him. Through the years, he's been nothing but supportive and gracious towards me. But I sort of got to learn from the best. And again, I did this one episode not counting on there being another episode. You know, I just never looked that far ahead. I just was sort of in the moment, enjoying my good fortune.
Talk a little bit about working with the creator and executive producer, Peter Noah.
Well, you know, even though he denies it, if it weren't for Peter, I don't know that I'd be certainly sitting here today talking to you. He saw something in me that I certainly didn't see in me. And he said that if I did it, not only would I be good at it, but he said you'll end up doing it a little bit more and then a little bit more, and it will be a snowball effect, and at some point it'll be all you do. That's truly what he said to me. So I guess he's kind of smart, and I'm grateful.
So talk about the format of the show. It was a multi-camera show?
It was a four-camera multicam show.
And had you ever done that format before?
I had so not done that before. I can't put it into words. And they weren't pedestal cameras, they were dolly cameras. And there were marks on the floor that were different from marks that I'd ever seen before. It was not as different as I thought it was, but back then I can tell you I thought I was sending a man to the moon. I cannot tell you how overwhelmed I was. But something really important happened to me on that show. We were camera blocking, and I set my shots, and a wonderful camera operator who's unfortunately no longer with us, a guy named Joe Blaisdell, called me over to his camera and said to me, you know, I'm shooting this, C is shooting this, maybe you want to shoot that. He was just trying to talk to me about something. So I was like, okay, so if he's getting that, I should get this. He's like, maybe. And he was absolutely right. And it was wildly kind of him to point that out. I go back, we finish the scene, we go to another scene, I set it up, and I said, Joe, okay? And he looked at me and said, yeah. And I realized that I didn't have to know everything. And I think that's one of the great lessons, and I was lucky to learn it then. But part of what made me so nervous, and there were many things that made me so nervous, and I'm nervous now, was that I thought I had to come in and know everything. But it turns out that when you're lucky enough to be in that position, everybody who does all of those jobs comes in knowing what they know better what they do than I would ever know. And you get to take advantage of that. And it's not only wildly helpful and life-saving, it's empowering. Directors don't have to know everything.
So now, Friends, as we all know, went on to become a huge success.
I hadn't heard.
What do you think set it apart? Why do you think it was so
I
successful?
think it's lightning in a bottle. It's so hard to answer a question like that. They were all so good and so good together, and you know, it certainly seemed like they loved each other, and it comes across, you know, and being there, I mean, and I wasn't there often, but there was an energy. It was different. It was well written. It was well acted. It was just, you know, I mean, you could, later we'll probably talk about How I Met Your Mother. I felt the same way about that. There's something that's sort of, you can't quite define it, but it's magic.
Do you think there's a secret to the success of a successful sitcom?
There cannot be, because I would know, somebody would have told me, and then I would tell you. I don't think so. I think there are things that certainly help, but to get all of those things happening at the same time, that's just magic.
So around that same time, you directed several episodes of Sybil.
I did.
And there were a lot of rumors of trouble on that set. So what was your experience working on that show?
I didn't experience that part. I learned a lot on that show, too. It was interesting to have someone with so much power in the cast. And Sybil was, you know, lovely to me. I got to work with Christine Baranski, who has become a friend and who I can't say enough wonderful things about her. I just think she is remarkably talented and even more wonderful off screen than on. And Jay Daniel was producing part of the time when I was there, and he taught me a lot. He would watch me set my shots, and he would ask me why I chose them. He really made me think about things. It's not enough to just put a camera on an actor or whatever. Why are you doing it? And he tested me, which back then probably made me wildly nervous, but it helped me. He made everything matter, and I think that's important. It was an interesting show because we didn't shoot the whole thing in front of an audience. We pre-shot some. We shot a certain number of pages in front of an audience because that's how Sybil liked to do it. I'm pretty good at not getting involved in any drama that might be happening, and it wasn't my place. I was really visiting more than anything, and I thought it was a really good show. And I thought the actors were really interesting, and I just came in and did my job.
Talk about working with the creator, Chuck Lorre.
I didn't work with him very much. He hired me and then left as I was coming in. It was our first time saying hello and getting to know each other, but ultimately we didn't spend any time together on that show, funnily enough.
Is that typical? Does a director
No.
typically work with an executive producer?
No, it's not. That's not typical. He just wasn't there. I mean, I got to work with him later, but not on that show.
So now in '97, you also had a pretty major milestone starting to work as a director on Frasier.
This is really fun because I had no idea that's when that happened. Yeah, I did. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's like getting invited to the greatest dinner party in the world. I loved every minute of that show. That was like going to graduate school. And I will tell you that part of the reason I got asked back was because I was fast. And I was fast because of my time and daytime. And that is the truth. So many people will tell you that when you wrap on a Friday night, they don't say, "How was the show?" They say, "What time did you get out?" And I knew how to keep things rolling. I will also tell you that when I first started, the episode, it started in a batting cage. That's what I'm remembering. And it's rehearsal, and you put the show up on its feet, and I say action, and we run through the scene. And we finish, and I say, as I had said every time before on every show I had done, "Let's do it again." And Kelsey said, Fryman's trying to suck all the comedy out of this. And my response, fortunately, was, does that mean we shouldn't do it again? And he said, we got it. And I'm like, fantastic. I certainly could have reacted a different way, but I didn't cry. I just want you to know. And I just had a rapport with him, and that sort of cemented it, because I understood that on this show, and as we said before, all of these shows are very different. On that particular show, they were so good, they knew what they were doing. And if we marked it, especially when it was a farce, it was different because we had so much going on. But on a regular scene, if you did it once, they kind of got it. And we would move on. And so we did.
That's great. Talk about working with David Angel, Peter Casey, and David Lee.
I can't say enough wonderful things. There was no reason in the world that they had to hire me on that show or keep me around, but they did. David Angel will always hold a very special place in my heart. He hugged me every time he saw me, and we got to be personal friends, both David and his wife, Lynn. David Lee is just a force. He's such a wildly, talented writer and director and everything, and it was just a pleasure to be in his presence. And Peter Casey as well. He's just a wonderful man and so warm and loving. So I got to work with those three giants who had done so much. And for some reason, I got to be in that room and on that stage. And for the life of me, I can't tell you why, but I was really lucky.
So you started directing in season 4. Had you watched the previous seasons?
Yes.
And how do you prepare for a show that's already been on the air?
I think sort of what I just said, when you come in, you take your cues from the actors and from people who've been there before, like what Kelsey said. I'm like, okay, I get that. And you just sort of learn. I don't have a giant ego, I have to say. And I'm very good at hanging back, but I'm also really organized and specific. So it was sort of a good match. And I like to get things done, and they like to get things done. And I also realized quickly when shooting that show, one of the reasons it got to move so fast was because they knew how to stick their landings, boy. And if you did a pass with David Hyde Pierce in a single, he did it. And you could take that camera and go get other coverage the next time. So it was a wildly efficient show to shoot, because they were that good. And that's why when they'd ask you what time you got out, you could say early, not because I was doing anything right, but because they were doing everything right.
Let's talk a little bit more about the cast. So,
wow.
Tell us about Kelsey Grammer. Tell us about working with him.
He's remarkable. He's so smart and so funny. It was interesting to watch his process, because he didn't really learn his lines. I mean, he asked for lines more than any actor in the world, but it was his thing. And you'd be shooting in front of an audience, and they would love it, and he'd yell out for it, and it came to him, but he was just born to play that role, and I had a really good seat, and I got to watch him do it. He was really kind and supportive to me, and I let him do what he did and didn't get in the way. And just, I think it was just sort of a great relationship. I could say that about all of them. I mean, David Hyde Pierce is just extraordinary. He's so specific, and he works so hard, and just so smart. John Mahoney, oh my God, John Mahoney. What do you say? He's just a wonder. And I would say the same thing about Perry and about Jane. Everybody embraced this show, and including the people who were on it, not just the viewers. And everybody had great respect for the process. So everybody took the time to really understand what they were doing, to make sure that they didn't get in each other's ways. They were there to just compliment each other and support each other. They would ask, each other's opinions on stuff. It was it was just beautifully run. And you can imagine how fortunate I am to have been a part of that.
So there's one other cast member we haven't talked about, and there's an adage about working with dogs. Tell us about working with the dogs that played Eddie.
He was a very well-trained, well-behaved dog, I have to say, with one of the great trainers of all time. Yeah, I had to work with him quite a bit on my episodes, but are you kidding me? That's a dog who took direction. So it was a breeze.
Was there a lot of camera direction written into Frasier scripts?
I wouldn't say any more than on any other show. But it was a really interesting set, a really wide. It was the theater. It was just capturing a play, more on that show than on any show I've ever done. And there were, a lot of times you do masters from the center, but you would do masters from the sides because everything was so beautiful. Just the set design was remarkable, thanks to Roy Christopher, and it was like spending time in the theater.
Was there a lot of improv?
No, there really wasn't a lot of improv. One of the things that they did on that show that I always loved so much was the tag on the show. You wouldn't see it until the audience was there. And then they would just hand it to you. It never had dialogue, and you just have to throw cameras up and tell actors what to do. And that was just always joyful. It was such a fun little moment to end each episode with.
So you did a lot of two-part episodes for Frasier. Are there any specific challenges doing two parts?
I did. No, you always look at them as single episodes, but it was always fun to, make a story last as long as it could. There was a great Halloween episode. Oh my God, it's one of those shows that when I catch it now, and I do every once in a while, I'm laughing out loud. It is so brilliant. They are all so good. That writing is just remarkable. And I remember thinking, you would go to the table read, and the table reads always killed. I mean, they were amazing. And you would think that then the writers would go home, but they didn't. They somehow took this perfect piece of writing and made it better and better and better and better. And that was a privilege to watch.
So now talk about your involvement in post-production and what you do. Do you work in the editing booth, or how does that work?
It depends on what the show is, but for a lot of these episodes, I would be fortunate enough that I would be into another episode while the previous episode was being edited, and a lot of times you'll just get the cut and you'll watch it and give notes. Every once in a while, if time allows, you go into the bay, but that's sort of the way it works.
Do you have a favorite or maybe particularly challenging episode that you directed of Frasier?
Okay. Guys, you got to give me a second on this one. I guess there were some farces that we did. There was one in particular that we did on a cruise ship that I suppose was as challenging as any of them are, but there was a scene in the bathroom of a stateroom. I believe it was in the bathtub with David and Maris, who we never saw, and John, and it was funny. It was funny like everything on that show is funny, but this in particular was just, it was impossibly funny. And we were shooting it in front of the audience, and they broke, and they just couldn't hold it together. And there are moments as a director where you're like, do I step in? Do I stop? Do I whatever? And I had to let it go. And it was, I would love to see the outtakes of that because it went on forever. Nobody could keep it together. And finally, obviously, they did. But, oh, what a joy to watch that. Oh, my God. It was remarkable.
Beginning in 1998, you directed 89 episodes of Just Shoot Me.
How lucky am I?
So tell us how that came about.
I believe how that came about was I did a show called The Naked Truth with Taya Leone. And George Siegel was in that. He played her father. And George then went and did Just Shoot Me. I got to know George and love George and will always love George. And I believe it was George who spoke to Steve Levitan about me, and I met with Steve and ultimately ended up doing that. And for, I believe it was 2 seasons, I did 3 Just Shoot Me's, then 3 Frasers, then 3 Just Shoot Me's, and 3 Frasers, and I'd go back and forth. I always found it weird that I was more tired than other people, but it turned out my hiatuses were being clipped. But can you imagine going back and forth between those 2 shows? Just Shoot Me was a dream. To this day, every few months, that entire cast, we all get together for dinner. That's the one show, I see them all the time. We email all the time, all of them, all of them. Something really special happened on that show. I mean, where I said Frasier was like the best dinner party you could ever be invited to, this was the best slumber party you could ever be invited to. It was fun and silly. We got the work done. We loved each other. And it was just a remarkable 89, how many episodes?
89.
89 episodes, yeah. Yeah, I'd like to do that again. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Talk a little bit about working with the creator, Steve Levitan.
Steve's a really smart guy who knew what he was doing. And as the years progressed with me on that show, because I ended up, I did share it for a while, but then I came on and just did the whole season. And he was just very involved. He's a great writer and a really good showrunner. And, you know, it was a delightful relationship. And then towards the end, he backed off a little bit and other people came in. But from beginning to end, that was a great experience.
So he's a director too. Did he give you any advice?
No, he wasn't really directing much then. That sort of happened after. Yeah. So he may have done a couple episodes, but I'm not quite sure.
So you talked about how great it is to work with this cast. What's your process for working with actors on a show like this?
I hug them a lot. That's key. Like I said before, I sort of like to, I just create an atmosphere where everybody wants to be there. And then the great value in being an in-house director, or at least doing multiple episodes, is you get to know these people and you get to know how they work. And just like I said on Frasier, I would get one pass of a close-up of David Hyde Pierce and I knew I had it. With David Spade, he did different things. It was a stand-up. He's a really funny guy, and just because I did something once didn't mean I wouldn't get something completely different on another pass. So that sort of dictated how you would shoot the show. And that's sort of fun too. It was just really different. And I just let them do what they wanted to do, and then I'd slowly kind of, massage it along the way. But it was those days, just the process on stage every day on that show was just a dream.